Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about throwing big. I used around 3.5 pounds of clay for this. First things first, I'm going to pat everything down, make sure that the edges are nice and tucked into the wheel. I don't want this flying off the wheel while I'm throwing, especially because I was throwing right next to a bunch of people. So, coming in really close to the clay, I need to get my chest in pretty deep just because 3.5 pounds is a lot of clay for someone like me to throw. And the more body weight I put into it, the easier it generally is for me. So I like to really focus on centering. Because this clay was fresh from the bag, I didn't really need to worry about coning it too much. I just wanted to get it super centered. Alright, so I'm happy with how centered it is. I'm going to start to open up the clay now. I'm going to create a well in the middle, and usually I use my thumbs for this, but for a piece this size, I decided to use my fist, my heel of my hand. Got my thumbs in there in the end just for that final little bit. But using the heel of your hand generally works better when you're throwing for pieces slightly larger. You have a little bit more control that way. Opening up the well, I like to open it decently wide because when I start to pull it, I'm going to cone it in a little bit again. So opening it pretty wide, compressing the floor. I don't know who I'm looking at. When I compress, I use my pointer finger, my middle finger, my ring finger, go back and forth on the bottom a few times. Going over it one more time with a sponge just to get it really smooth at the bottom. And now I can start to finally bring up the walls. I'm going to cone in from the bottom, bring it up towards the top. And I can finally start that first pull. I have a very pronounced Potter's head bobble. Do not make fun of me for it. I know it's weird looking. A little bit of slip at the top. Just wipe that off with the sponge, no big deal. And I am ready for my second one. So making sure that you make that little indent at the very bottom today. I don't really have a super important why. I switch beginner potters sponge and my knuckle oftentimes will be confused why like a sponge day. Taller. So that is what I did. 9 times out of 10, it's because they forgot to make that little indent. Without that indent, you don't have any clay to pull up. So make sure that you make it, and you won't have that problem. After a second pull, I'll go in for a third pull. Third pulls generally, at least for me, aren't so much about height at this point. I'm focusing more on shaping. You're going to see throughout this video, I did not know where I was trying to take this piece, and it changes shape a whole bunch of times. But yeah, final pull. Getting a little bit of height, I guess. Head bobbing. Very pronounced. Okay. And once I reach the rim, I'm really careful with the way I release my hands. That's another problem I see a lot of beginner potters have, is they release really quickly or really dramatically. They're anxious and they want to be done with their pull, and they end up making undulations in the rim or just throughout the piece in general. So another important thing to keep in mind is just being mindful as you are touching your clay. You are the tool, so whatever you do, that's going to get imparted into your piece. Sponging out the inside, you might be able to tell I have kind of long nails, so I tend to gouge the inside of my pieces during my pulls, and instead of cutting my nails, I just come in with a sponge and start to smooth that down after I've done the majority of my pulls. I am taking off the skirt using this little wooden rib. I like to use the wooden knife too. Either one works. Just make sure that if you are using a wooden rib that you're keeping the pointed side down. Collaring slightly just to make sure everything stays within center. I love collaring. It is my best friend. And when you're throwing big pieces, being confident in your ability to collar is huge because it will keep everything in center. Doing the same thing with the wooden rib again, just getting rid of excess slip and the skirt at the bottom of my piece. Now I'm going to start slowly shaping my piece with the wooden rib. Generally, I would suggest trying to use a rubber rib for this. Mud Tools makes incredible ribs. I like the red ones because they're a little bit flexy. But today I was just using the studio tools, so I went with the wooden rib. I'm using my inside hand to push the clay towards my rib. I guess now I'm using a metal rib, metal kidney. But inside hand is pushing gently, super gently, doing a pull, essentially. But pulling that clay into my rib. I have my rib more or less where I want my clay to be. And then I can glide and guide that clay into that rib to get the shape that I am going for. So every once in a while, I'll wipe that slip off with my fingers just to keep the rib relatively clean so I'm not imparting extra random clay onto the walls of my piece. And yeah, bobbling that head, doing my thing. And I do make some mistakes in this video, which I will call out because I think watching people throw well and watching people throw not so well both can be extremely educational. So leaving that in, we will talk about that. I'm collaring the neck at this point. I think at this point I was thinking about turning this guy into a moon jar. I do not make it a moon jar in the end. Notice how I curved my rib there just now. I want to use the curved side of my rib on my piece. I don't want to be using that flat edge because it will make things more difficult for me. Collaring again. I'm trying to connect as much skin to the piece as possible. When you're collaring, you want to make a lot of contact. Because that's going to help glide the clay back into itself. So I had both of my hands wrapped around at that point. Now I'm going to start to pull up on the neck of the piece itself. Spoiler alert, this won't be here for very long. Yeah, I just was not very happy with the piece at this point. You'll notice that it's not perfectly centered in the belly, and I'm losing the shoulder of the piece because I'm not pulling from high enough up. I'm going to fix all of these things a little bit later on. Yeah, no, I don't look super happy. Collaring again. And notice how when I collar from low down, I end up kind of destroying the shoulder of that piece. You don't want to do that. Learn from my mistakes. I'm now pulling clay back up into that shoulder because I realized, ooh, that looks really ugly. And the rim got all floppy. I'm not panicked. I know how to fix this, but it does look a little bit awkward right now. It's going through its awkward phase. And you know what, same. Gonna use my needle to take off some of the rim right there. Collar it a little bit more. Do my lean back. I'm still not happy with how it's looking, but I've got a plan. Pulling more clay up into that joint, which is a really, really great tip. If you feel a thin area in your piece, go a little bit below that area and start to pull thickness from the rest of your piece into that area, and you can actually begin to even out those walls just doing that itself. So you don't have to panic if you feel a thin spot. You can bring some clay back into that area and you might just be able to save your piece. Playing more with the collaring. Notice again, I'm making a lot of contact with my skin on this piece when I'm doing that. Taking more off with the needle. Yeah, get rid of it. We don't need that. And pulling more clay up into the rim. One of the most fun parts of pottery for me is just feeling like I can do whatever I want. If I want to cut stuff off, I can. If I change my mind halfway through, 80% of the way through, totally fine. It's my piece. Yes, clay has memory. Yes, clay can be overhydrated, but if you're mindful, you can stretch your clay a lot more than you think you can. And so, I just keep messing around with the shape until I find something I like. Something that doesn't feel super fugly to me anymore. Bringing more clay up into the rim. And then I'm going to come back in, clean up the foot again. Nice thing about using a wooden rib for this is that you can actually cut some of the undulation out with that too. So you can see that little bottom bit now is a lot more centered than the area right above it. The rest of it will get centered eventually, but that's nice. That's a nice perk. Here's where I start to really bring that shoulder back up, and I start to finally be a little bit more inspired by the form I'm throwing. A strong shoulder, which is maybe obvious, but that little top bit right by the rim, that's really make or break in large pieces, especially large pieces with some curvature like this one. It just makes the form look that much better. I collared in the belly slightly, then I kept messing with the rim, and then I was happy. Time to take it off. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, follow for more. Have a great one.